Today we're going to use a graph to understand relationships. We're going to learn about line graphs. Today we're going to practice reading a line graph. That's our goal for the day, learning to practice reading a line graph and understand what it's telling us. What is a line graph? A line graph is a way to show information. It is a way to show the relationship between two different types of information. This graph is comparing how many new COVID cases happened over a period of time. The x-axis is the line across the bottom. For this graph, the x-axis is measuring time in days, weeks, and months. The y-axis is the line going straight up and down. For this graph, the y-axis is measuring how many new COVID cases are found each day. The x-axis, measuring time in days, weeks, and months, focus on its measuring time. The y-axis is counting new COVID cases, but this is a count, it's a number. We're counting how many cases there are. By using this graph, we can see the relationship. We are comparing the relationship between how many new cases are found each day, that's a quantity, with how many days have passed since February, that's the time. By using this graph, we can see the relationship. We can see that the numbers did not start rising until almost April. You can see it was, from February, it was all right along the line here at 0, and then just about coming up into April, we started having a rising number of cases. We can also see that there was a big drop in numbers at the beginning of August. Now, try observing details from this graph. I just made this graph up, but let's pretend that we're building a fire and we are measuring what? What are we measuring in this example of a fire in a graph? We have an x-axis. What's the x-axis measuring? And we have the y-axis. What's the y-axis measuring? So what is the x-axis measuring? The x-axis is measuring the temperature in Celsius. The y-axis, what is the y-axis measuring? The number of logs on the fire. So this is just made up, but it's an example of how to read a graph. If we look at what happens when you put more logs on the fire, well, at 0 logs, or at 5 logs, there is no temperature, it's 0. And then it rises when you put 5 more logs on, and then more logs, and it keeps rising, right? What happens when you put more than 25 logs on the fire? Does it keep rising? I'm going to let you answer that question for me. Alright, try this. This is another one. This is about the Zika virus. Zika virus is a virus that came out big in the news a few years ago. 2015, 2016, we saw it popping up in various places around the world. And we have the number of pregnant women with the Zika virus and the number of infants with microcephaly. Microcephaly was a strange phenomenon when the babies were born to people who had the virus. The babies would be born with a really small head. Go back and answer the questions on this fire chart, telling me what is the x-axis measuring, what is the y-axis measuring, what happens when you put more logs on the fire, and what happens when you put more than 25 logs on the fire. So now I want you to look at the data for the Zika virus and answer these questions. What is the x-axis measuring? What are two things the y-axis is measuring? There are two different lines, so we have two different things that is being measured on the y-axis. And then what do you see is the relationship between time and pregnancies of women with Zika?